Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
My friends, if you want a microcosm into what it looks like when the radical left runs things in America, look no further than the debacle we have happening inside the WNBA. I know, listen, I don't necessarily want to talk about this, but I think it's important to understand where these ideas, where this bad leadership, where this wokeness, where the talking points, where the narrative, all those things lead us when it comes to actually succeeding in this country, whether it be in business, as it is the case with the WNBA, whether it is politics, as it is with the Democrat Party, the radical left who's taken over that party. Friends, this leads in disaster each and every time that it's tried, and it is a perfect example of what we are looking dead into the eyes of if we elect Democrats in this midterm election this November. Welcome to the program, my friends. I'm glad you're here. Today is also, I'm excited to tell you, the 11th anniversary of this program. I'll say a little bit more about that as the program unfolds today, but our 11th anniversary, 11 years ago today, is when we launched this program, which might surprise you, was originally called the Antidote to Liberalism, and now it, of course, is called the Todd Huff Show, conservative, not bitter. Here, we'll talk about that. I appreciate those of you who have been with us from the very beginning or for many years now. We're celebrating today our 11th anniversary. So I want to talk about what's happening with the WNBA, with Enes, Kanter, Freedom, with Royce, White, with what happened over the weekend, with tweets and everything else about white privilege from one WNBA player directed towards another post on social media from a former WNBA player calling a foul that happened this weekend a trans foul, a foul that targeted the Indiana Fever's Sophie Cunningham, which candidly was assault, if I want to get right down to it. Anyway, I want to talk about those things today, my friends. Welcome to the program. If you want to share your thoughts and questions, feedback, you can text 317-785-1030 or email Todd at toddhuffshow.com. Friends, are you tired of spending your hard-earned money at businesses that turn around and support leftist candidates, leftist causes? Things that look an awful lot like how the WNBA is run today, my friends. Well, that's exactly why we created Freedom Marketplace. We should create a women's basketball league here. Anyway, that's not on the plans here, but there are other businesses out there that don't subscribe to the wokeness and the insanity that's going on out there. This is a free searchable directory of businesses that share your conservative principles and values. These are businesses that have made a pledge to not support leftist candidates, leftist causes, or the nonsense that, of course, makes it what it is today. There's no login required, though you certainly can create your own account. There's no strings attached. These are just good, patriotic businesses that are pushing in the same direction you are. Check it out, freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net, liberty and business for all. You know, I want to first play a soundbite. This is, I don't know when Trump said this. This might have been last week or the week before. It was certainly before Enes Kanter Freedom, who, by the way, is a former NBA player. He's a former NBA player. He is one that took a lot of fire for some of the things that he was standing up for and defending as an athlete, using his voice for in the NBA years ago. And this was before he made his declaration that he is now eligible for the WNBA draft, which I think is fantastic. You may recall last week, I said on this program, I mean, listen, you could say it's satire and parody, but I also believe it. I think that the NBA, the WNBA, should sign this trans woman, Julie Tatar, who's from France, who's dominating. Trans woman, meaning fake woman, meaning biological man, competing against women in France and dominating across the pond. And there are no, the WNBA has not come out and said definitively what a woman is, who can play in their league. They've been playing footsie. They've been tiptoeing around this trans agenda. Excuse me, my friends. They've been playing footsie with the trans agenda for a long time now. And, of course, the best thing would be for the WNBA to come out and say, listen, this is a women's league. Women have XY chromosomes. This is not a complicated issue. We know what a woman is. It's an adult human female who is capable, who has the design, the sex organs to have children, basically. I mean, this is not a complicated thing, friends. This is not complicated, but they don't do that. In fact, if you look at the collective bargaining agreement, both the one that just expired and the new one that was renegotiated here in March of this year for the WNBA, you'll find that there are a whole host of terms that are defined in the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement. But inside that document, you will not see a definition of what a woman is. And so Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White, both former NBA players, have said, look, we've gone through all of the documents. Our teams have taken a look at this, and there's nothing that precludes us from declaring our eligibility for the 2027 WNBA draft. And I think this is exactly what needs to be done. By the way, again, today's program should be seen through the lens that this is what it looks like, the way the WNBA is being run today, by a mixture of a whole bunch of different types of people. They're woke. They are, to some degree, they'll tell you feminist, but yet at the same time, they can't define what a woman is. So you've got that complexity and confusion there. These are all Democrats. These are all people who are, again, on the pro-LGBTQIA plus agenda program, supporters of that stuff. And yet you can see the chaos and the confusion. They can't even. It's literally the first word that names their organization, Women's National Basketball Association. They can't and won't define it. And this is what happens. And this is what happens to your culture, to your society, to your government when you let the people who believe the same things, and it doesn't matter if it's women's basketball. That's where I want you to see past it. If you're like, Todd, I don't want to talk about women's basketball. I've seen that they miss about 75% of their layups, and I don't disagree with that. I still watch with my daughters, and it's entertaining at times. It's very bad basketball at other times. But being here in Indiana, it's easy to get behind the likes of Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham, and there's the tension and the chaos follows them everywhere they go because they represent what, the people who are targeted in this league. And I'll get to the foul on Sophie Cunningham, not one that she committed, but one that she took literally on the chin and across the neck during this weekend's basketball game. But regardless, my friends, there's been two NBA players, former NBA players, declare their eligibility for the 2027 WNBA draft. The best thing to do, of course, for the WNBA would be to say, we know what women are. These are men. Let's stop the nonsense. But they don't. They won't do it. In fact, Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA, she is, they're going to have to meet and decide how to handle this sort of thing. They can't, it has thrown them for such a loop that they cannot even understand how to manage it. And this should not be confusing. You know, I've had knuckleheads from the left in my social media comments, Facebook comments, again, 99% of which I don't read, but we have ways to see, you know, some of the things that have been said and so forth. But some people say, well, who's trying to declare as a man for the WNBA? And what type of foresight did it see that this was going to happen? I was literally calling for Julie Tatar, again, half parody, half satire. But the reality is that I want something like this to happen. It's going to stress test the league. They're either going to put on their big girl pants and solve this problem, or they are going to crash this thing headfirst into the ground. And look, I'm sorry for the people who have brains and who have a basic biological, scientific understanding of, well, biology and life and reality, who are in the WNBA. People like Sophie Cunningham, and I don't know how many there are. I suspect Caitlin Clark. I think she just wants to stay out of the fray. But nonetheless, it's too bad for these folks because this league, which already has been propped up by the NBA, subsidized by the NBA for 30 years now, you know, it's just a mess. It is an absolute mess. A lot of these women are angry. They hate Sophie Cunningham. They hate people who are not pro LGBTQIA plus, which of course is the vast majority of normal people. Doesn't mean that you hate the people who identify with that movement, but it just says, look, I'm not part of it. That's not something that I support. It's not something I agree with. Most people would say whatever you do is your business. Just don't force it down my throat. Don't force me to comply. Don't force me to wear, as was the case in Seinfeld, wear the ribbon, right? If you remember the old Seinfeld, where Kramer went to the AIDS walk. This was back in the 90s, my friends. He shows up, he signs up for the AIDS walk, and they say, here's your ribbon. And he says, I don't want it. And they say, what do you mean you're not going to wear the ribbon? Everybody wears the ribbon. He's got a ribbon. She's got a ribbon. Where's your ribbon? Kramer says, I don't want to wear the ribbon. Don't you support us? Aren't you one of us, is the reply. Well, yeah, I'm one of you. I'm at the march, aren't I? But you're not wearing the ribbon. And of course, Kramer gets chased down, tries to get away, but ultimately gets beat up by this cast of madmen and lunatics. And that's what we're dealing with today. It's exactly what we're dealing with today. You comply or you face the consequences. You get the jab or you face the consequences. They'll attack you. We talked about this last week. The COVID jab, the masking policies, all the silly stuff that we were subjected to, all the COVID tyranny, I'll say louder for those in the back. For all of this, all the nonsense, you were intimidated, you were coerced, you were forced, you were threatened, you were mocked, you were ridiculed. People cheered that you caught COVID and died and were put on ventilators. This absolutely is what happened. This is how they behave. This is who they are. It is what they believe, my friends. And this is where we are today. And this is what it's going to look like. This is what it's going to look like for the entire country, not just, again, the microcosm of the WNBA, if these people are given political power to run things. So, maybe last week, I'm going to first play this clip. President Trump took to the podium and does what only President Trump can do. He talks about if he was a coach in the WNBA, of course, he would be the best coach ever, he says. But then he also throws this out there. Keep in mind, this was before Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White declared for the WNBA draft. But here's Trump at the podium talking about these things, making obvious the absolute insanity that's inside our current WNBA.
Be the greatest women's basketball coach in history. Because I don't like LeBron James. I like Michael Jordan much better. But I'd go up to LeBron James. It doesn't matter. I say, LeBron, did you ever have any desire to be a woman? Because what I'd love you to do is star on my team that I'm building up. I will have the greatest team in history. They'll never lose. Nobody will come within 70 points of this team.
It's true, by the way.
Now, we have to change that, and we have to make it okay to talk about it. You know, the young lady I was talking about is afraid to talk about it. She's shunned and she's canceled when she talks about it. This is crazy. Right, Kellyanne? I see my...
So that's what happens, obviously, right? If you're a woman who speaks out against this, you get canceled, you get targeted, you get attacked. It is crazy. It's absolute lunacy. Trump says I'd be the greatest WNBA basketball coach in history because I'd call up LeBron James. I'm a fan of Michael Jordan. I prefer Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan doesn't hate Republicans. Michael Jordan doesn't hate me. But look, it doesn't matter. LeBron James is a dominant force on the basketball court. Even at his age, I'd call him up and say, LeBron, have you ever felt like a woman? If you have, then join my WNBA team. And this is exactly what happened. It's almost like Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White were listening to this speech or saw this because both of these men have declared eligible, their eligibility for the WNBA draft. In fact, I'll play their announcements here, some of their comments here, in just a brief moment, my friends, as I pull this up. Before I do that, though, friends, if you're dealing with discomfort, if you're just tired of living off of prescriptions, managing those side effects, you are not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. There's no hype. There's no synthetics. There is no funny business. Just the real thing, the real deal done right, my friends. And the key is that real kratom is tested. Real kratom is responsibly sourced. It's not a synthetic. It's natural. The horror stories that you've heard about kratom come from the shady sellers and the synthetic garbage out there that isn't even real kratom at all. So, start with their kratom starter pack. Use coupon code Todd Huff, discount code Todd Huff to save 10%. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, and transparency, my friends. Fighting a bit of an allergy here this morning. In fact, if you're watching on the stream, you might see I've got a little bit of redness around my right eye. I'm fine. I'll suck it up and be tough. But I've got these allergies, and the reality is that, listen, they are really a problem for me from time to time, and it'll attack my vocals, which it's been doing here this morning. So that being said, let's shift gears and let's play What Is It Doing Here? Let's shift these gears, this soundbite, to the announcements of both Enes, Kanter, Freedom, Royce White, talking about their declaration. These are, again, to play in the WNBA, to make themselves eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft, which is, when do they do that draft? It's after the women's college basketball season, and it's before tip-off of the women's professional season, so it's like May or early June or something where they have this draft. There's not a lot of time to go from draft night to the opening night, basically. So Enes Kanter Freedom is a former NBA player. Man, I think he's 6'10", 260 or something like this. He's a big guy, a big, strong guy, a big physical guy, even by the NBA standards. Royce White is a little bit smaller, but still a physical, big, strong guy. Both of these guys, again, played in the NBA. Both of them have recently declared that they are making themselves eligible because there's no provision that prevents it. They're both declaring themselves eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft. Here's a montage of both of these things that Fox News, Fox and Friends had put together. Let's listen.
Have carefully examined the WNBA's eligibility criteria and governing framework surrounding self-identification and inclusion. Based on the current guidelines, I can and am officially declaring my eligibility for the upcoming WNBA draft in May 2027. I am definitely not here to mock, make fun of, or disrespect any community or personal choices. I am simply asking that the current rules be applied equally to everyone. The rules that represent the very values many WNBA players and coaches have publicly advocated for.
Great minds think.
Yeah, that was Enes Kanter. He says, look, I'm not making fun of it. And by the way, we're not making fun of it. We're illustrating the absurdity of this. I've said on this program before, if someone struggles with these issues, I don't take pleasure in that. If someone struggles with identity, if they've bought into the narrative of what this means and that they should have hormone blockers and physical mutilation of their body, that is a sad thing. My heart goes out to folks who struggle with this. I would say that those folks should first and foremost turn their backs on the lunatics that are telling them that this sort of thing is natural and normal and good, and they should try to understand that there are that there's a creation, there's an order to creation, that God created male and female, that this is not ambiguous, that this is not there's this androgyny that exists out there today is not, there's male and female. We can all be individuals, of course, and we all have different personalities, and there's, of course, people check different boxes along the continuum of masculinity and femininity and all that sort of stuff. But this has gotten absolutely crazy. And for people who struggle with this, they should be helped through this, not pushed into the abyss that is caused by these radical solutions, especially when there's physical permanent mutilation, especially of young people, of their bodies, and of course hormone therapy, that some of these things are irreversible to some extent. And there are people out there, Chloe Cole is one of them, who went through the transition and now is basically advocating that this stuff be stopped, that this stuff be prevented, especially for the young people out there. But that was Enes Kanter Freedom. Here's Royce White, another former NBA player, declaring himself eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft.
Think alike, and it's only fair that some of us get a shot to play in the Women's Association. I'm 260 pounds, 265 pounds, 6'8", can palm a man's basketball probably as easily as any player in history. I'm sure that the women's basketball is going to fare even easier to palm, which is a huge advantage.
It is a huge advantage, right? So that's just a sampling, if you will, a montage of what these guys have said, and now they've declared themselves. What's the WNBA supposed to do now? They've only got a couple of options here. We'll go through those. But again, to me today on this program, which by the way is the 11th anniversary of this program again, but the lens through which I want to look at this and watch this, look and discuss this, is through the lens that says the way that the WNBA is being run by these leftist lunatics, this is exactly what we're on course for in this country if we let these Democrats and socialists and leftists and woke lunatics have political power in this country. And that's important to note as we head toward the 2026 primary. I've got to take a time out, my friends. If you're watching on the stream, I'm going to start a fresh one. If you're listening on radio or podcast, sit tight. We'll be back, my friends, in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking here about the train wreck that is the WNBA. And by the way, it's the train wreck that will be the United States of America if we let the people who believe these same things, that are woke leftist Democrats running the show in the WNBA. Make no mistake about it. This is who runs the WNBA. This is who largely plays in the WNBA. In fact, if you aren't woke, Democrat, leftist, pro-trans, and all this sort of stuff, you're quiet in the WNBA unless your name is Sophie Cunningham, because you want to keep your head down so that you don't take incoming fire from a very woke and very leftist league. So what are they supposed to do? There's an article here. It was at Fox News, written by Zach Dean of Outkick. Headline here says the WNBA has limited options after 2 men declared for the draft, and those options aren't great. So I'm just going to go through the list of options. What does the WNBA do here in the wake of this? Here's the options as pointed out here in this article. The WNBA could just reject them with no explanation. Look, the WNBA is meeting. They're meeting to discuss this. They're meeting to try to figure out how do we navigate this. Because this is like the moment in the Wizard of Oz when they realized that there's a man behind the curtain, right? Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Well, there's no man behind the curtain here in the WNBA, but there's a bunch of people, a bunch of women bunch of actual women who can't define what a woman is, who have no rules that make any sense, who are pushing this nonsense on the league, on their fans, on the American public, and none of it makes sense. And so they could just pretend like, listen, they could just say no to them and not give an explanation. Like, you could say in the one sense that that's the easiest option for them to not have to get into definitions and so forth. But I tell you what, they might get into lawsuits because, again, if you look at, Section 8 of the collective bargaining agreement, you will find there's no definition for the word woman. There's definitions for all sorts of things in the collective bargaining agreement, but not a definition of woman. So they may get sued for this. And you know what? Again, I'm not a big guy who's in favor of litigating these sorts of things, but there's a time when this stuff needs to be exposed. This is a women's basketball league. Why would they take men? But to say that they won't take these two men when they would be open to taking other men like Julie Tatar, that is, folks, that's textbook illegal discrimination. Let's define these things. They could reject Royce White and Enes Kanter Freedom as cisgender men. Now, I know many of you hear me say that and say, what on earth is going on here? Again, Article 8 of the CBA says only players who are women are eligible to play in the WNBA. But the word woman is not defined here. And we know that no one on the left can define a woman. We've gone through this with Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's now sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court. We see this constantly from Matt Walsh. I couldn't think of his last name last week, and that was not meant to be an insult. I like what he does a lot. But Matt Walsh has exposed this through his documentary, What is a Woman? They don't know. They can't define it. They use the word consistent, or they use the word constantly, but they don't define it. They can't define it because they don't want to say what it really is, and there's no other way to define it unless you actually tell us what it really is. So that's a possibility that they could do. They could create an objective trans eligibility standard. Oh boy, that could be interesting. That could be interesting indeed. They could define eligibility by biological sex. This would seem to be quite an obvious solution. But again, there's no obvious solution to these radically insane, deranged leftists. And they could accept both of these, both Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White as women. They could accept them. If that happens, listen, and I don't mean this as, these were obviously, the talent required to get to the WNBA is off the charts. In fact, you might have heard there was a former player in the NBA named Brian Scalabrine. Brian Scalabrine didn't play a lot in the NBA, but he's well known for a lot of things. I think he's got a podcast now. He plays other players to show just how good, even as a retired guy, NBA players are against, say, the average Joe. But he said, he's told people who don't play in the NBA, I'm closer, Brian Scalabrine would say, he's closer to LeBron James than the average person is to him. And there's truth in that. There's truth in that. And I don't think the average person understands just how good these guys are. And I don't think the average people understand that. Well, I think common sense people do know this. They know there's a big gap between men and women. But again, I shared on this program last week, Paige Beckers, who's one of the WNBA's premier talents or whatever, she was asked on a podcast, if you could play anybody one-on-one, who would you play? She said Kobe Bryant. And then they said, oh, what's the score? What's the score? Well, Kobe's going to beat me, but it's going to be 11-7. The heck it's going to be 11-7, Paige Beckers. Kobe Bryant is going to beat you 11-0, and I don't think you get a shot that's not blocked by Kobe Bryant. I don't think you could penetrate 1 foot against Kobe Bryant. I think if you're not just taking the ball and trying to get space by running backwards and heaving it up, unless something goes in like that, you're not hitting the backboard with the shot. It's going to be 11-0. It's going to be fast. And if it's make it, take it, you're not going to see the basketball, especially if he gets the ball first. You're not. This is crazy talk. I remember years ago, there was a player in the NBA named DeMarcus Cousins. He was huge, 7 foot, around 7 foot, just a very big guy. Boogie was his nickname, Boogie Cousins. Now he was kind of was a lazy player, but dominant. When he decided to play, this guy was dominant. And Brittany Griner said that she could beat DeMarcus Cousins one-on-one. To which Gino, what's his name, the Connecticut coach, this was back when there was it must have been the Olympics of maybe like 2012 or something like that. Coach Gino said, listen, and I credit him for this, from UConn. He said, listen, I would take my house, take my mortgage, and take it to the better and bet everything on the house, put the house up that DeMarcus Cousins would beat Brittany Griner. I couldn't be. And he was a coach for the women. Of course, this is the thing. And again, this is not meant to be an insult to women. That's not the point. There are other things that are, listen, there's a lot of interesting things that happen in the WNBA. In fact, we get to some of them. I don't have time, but much at all. But even this weekend, there was a Saturday. Sophie Cunningham gets fouled incredibly hard, an incredibly cheap shot coming from, what is her name, Dejanay. I'm looking here in my notes. I can't think of her last name. She plays on the Chicago Sky. Anyway, she comes in and she fouls, Dejanay Carrington. I knew it was a C. She fouls Sophie Cunningham. You could tell that as she was running at Sophie, and it's not even a foul. It was an assault. Sophie goes in for a layup. Dejanay Carrington comes in. I mean, just freaking knocks her out of the sky, comes around her neck, it's a headshot, basically. She wasn't going for the ball. It turns into a flagrant 2. You could tell that she was coming with anger and rage. They hate Sophie Cunningham. They hate her for the things she said. They hate Caitlin Clark. I mean, there's been some incredible cheap shots. And, of course, the Fever are competitive. They're getting better. They're not still as good as I think they probably should be. But listen, it can be entertaining if you understand what you're looking for. After the game, Carrington posted white privilege. White privilege because, of course, Sophie Cunningham is white. Dejanay Carrington is black. And apparently she says the only reason that was a flagrant 2 is because Sophie's white, which is ridiculous. Then on top of that, a former player, Sydney Colson, used to play with Sophie on the Fever last year, said, quote, on social media, I love a trans foul, right? This is where this gets to. If you don't agree with these women who are part of the LGBTQIA trans movement and all this stuff, then they think that they're totally justified in coming and assaulting you on the court. This WNBA, this is what it looks like when the left runs an organization like the WNBA. This is what it looks like if the left runs the United States of America. It is chaos. It is tumult. It is turmoil. It is confusion. They have no idea what's going on. They can define nothing. They have no objective standards other than if you're a leftist, if you're an American, you need to comply with what the leftists say or else face the consequences of these deranged lunatics. These people should not be able to run a fantasy football league, let alone the WNBA or the United States of America. I've got to take a time out, my friends. You're listening here to the home of conservative, not bitter talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I'm shifting gears. I'm moving on from all this chaos and the mess of the WNBA, the mess that the left leaves us with constantly here in this country. Everything that they touch literally turns to absolute chaos and collapses. But what else would you expect? This is a morally bankrupt worldview and ideology. It does not know how to live in reality because it denies reality at each and every turn, including basic things like what is a woman. I want to talk now to tell you, I told you off the top, Today marks our 11th anniversary of this program, and I want to say thank you. Thank you to those of you who have been with us from the very beginning. August 10th. Why did I say October? August 10th, 2015. We launched this program. You may not know, I mentioned this off the top. It used to be called the Antidote to Liberalism. That was before it evolved into a radio show, the Todd Huff Show. That was 11 years ago. And I started the show in a bedroom closet. In fact, I used to say I started it in my wife's bedroom closet. That, of course, caused confusion because really we didn't have separate bedrooms. We had the same bedroom with multiple closets. So her closet in our bedroom is where we started this back in 2015, 11 years ago. And we've grown since then, and I want to say thank you. Now we're on over 20 stations. This is the top 3% podcast in the world. And we've increased our reach. We're starting to do more on social media. Listen, I spent a lot of time and effort trying to grow the show on radio stations in the early days, and we really had difficulty on social media. Probably some things because I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't very good at it. But other things were because we had content taken down. We were shadow banned. I don't know. But we've gotten some traction on Facebook, having several million. We're reaching several million people over the course of the past, we'll say 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks or so, is where we've really kind of made some inroads. If you're not following us on Facebook, I encourage you to do that. That's a great way to share our content and help us to reach more people with truth. But it's been a wild, wild ride, my friends, a wild ride. 11 years ago today. By the way, I should tell you that I'm sending out an email to subscribers in addition to our regular published Inner Circle issue today, which is free. There's going to be something that goes out today that I've been building for some time. It's the next chapter of this program, of the show. And subscribers get to hear about that first. That's on purpose. That's the way that it works. The Inner Circle is exactly that, the Inner Circle. So if you want to know about it, you can subscribe to the Inner Circle. Text the word JOIN to 317-785-1030, or I'll announce it here on this program later this week. But anyway, lots of things happening. This program, again, started as the Antidote to Liberalism in 2015 in a bedroom closet. And now we're on a couple dozen stations, reaching several 100,000 people. And, of course, our reach on social media is even larger than that. And I want to say thank you. I'll tell you a really quick story, too. I'm looking at the clock. There's lots I would like to share with you. But, again, I'm constrained by the time restrictions of radio. But I'll tell you, August 10th, 2015, we started this podcast. In October of 2016, October 3rd, that was the first day it aired. This program aired as a radio show on the radio in Indianapolis. And I remember, of course, 2016, that was the election year for Trump. And I remember contacting the station. Now, this would have been just a month after we first aired on that station. October 3rd is, again, when we aired on the radio. So I forget election day, but it was early November 2016. I had talked with the station. I said, look, what if I came in on election night and we did something on election night? They said, yeah, you could give election night updates during commercial breaks of another program that was on that night. And I said, great, sounds like a plan. So I was planning on being there for 3 hours. And the idea was during the commercial breaks, which say there's 3 or 4 commercial breaks an hour, I'd get a couple minutes to give updates during election night. And so that's what I was prepared to do. And after, I don't know if it was the first hour, I think it might have been the first full hour, the program director, Jeremy, comes into the studio with this strange look on his face. And I said, what's up? What's going on, man? He said, well, the signal right? The signal that we receive from the program that we air has gone down. And he said, this never happens. And it was election night. So this is a pretty big night for talk radio. And he said, can you take the whole thing? I said, what do you mean? Like talk the whole time? And he's like, yeah. I said, sure thing. He said, how long do you need? I said 30 seconds or 60 seconds or something. He basically walked out of the studio, walked behind the glass into the control panel back there, and I heard the music coming on in my headphones. And we basically then we went another 3 or 4 hours that night on election night. So I went from thinking I had to talk for 2 minutes to thinking I had to talk for basically, say, 40 or 45 minutes an hour. And it was a great time, great opportunity. But that happened in the early days. There's so many more stories, but thank you. This is our 11th anniversary. Thank you for those who have listened. Have a great day, my friends. SDG.